time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Joan, as always, exceptional work from you from, your TV days all the way up to the day. You're truly exceptional, and thanks for this great show you have.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
We love to talk to senior political reporter for Heartland Signal, Aaron Kleinman, after a bunch of primaries, though he is usually exceedingly sleep-deprived, which often makes for a very interesting conversation. So how are you today, Aaron? Do you need some coffee?
I'm actually good because, Florida usually counts pretty quickly. They learned their lesson after 2000. And the other, there was Wyoming and then Alaska. They don't report till like 4 a.m. And I'm like, you know what? I could just wake up early and figure that one out. So I got my 8 hours. I'm good. Let's get into it.
Hey, before we get into the actual primaries, I got a call during the calling portion of our program from somebody who told me about median strategies. I looked it up on, of course, that very reliable source, Wikipedia. And here's what they start with. Median Strategies, a company which initially described itself as a pollster and later as a short-term social experiment. In August, it released purported results of public opinion polls in the 2026 Los Angeles mayoral election and the 2026 gubernatorial elections in Wisconsin and Nevada. Then a few days later, retracted all of its releases, stating all previously published polling releases have been withdrawn and should not be cited or treated as genuine polling data. It was an experiment. I'm not quite sure what the scientific experiment was supposed to accomplish, but that's really weird. What do you know about this?
Yeah, well, I've been online long enough to, anytime someone I remember 25 years ago, you'd be on the forums and someone make a dumb post. They'd be like, well, I was doing a social experiment to show how people would react to what this was, like classic excuse online. But there's unfortunately things that you can exploit right now. A lot of people get polling information from these aggregators that you might have seen on Twitter. That put out, whenever someone sends them a release, they'll put it out. They won't vet it at all. And the reason why someone would do this is because there are now prediction markets where you can bet on outcomes of elections. And so they put these out.
Put those together.
They try to change the odds in these, bet accordingly, and try to make some money off of this. So for everyone out there, again, I would say those polling aggregators that you see on Twitter, they're pretty dubious. There's a website that I use called 50+1. I would go there if you ever just want to see the latest polling. They do a good job of vetting what's real and what's not. They're made up of people that were at 538 before ABC shut it down. And then the prediction markets themselves, which, by the way, they have their own kind of right-wing views on things. Like Polymarket, one of the bigger ones, was, anti-vaccine, putting out anti-vaccine messaging. So, I certainly wouldn't trust those websites, especially their official communications, to tell you what's going on. And, this is actually a pretty good segue, Joan, because did you know that these websites gave Alex Vindman around a 100% chance of winning the Florida Senate primary last night?
Oh, wow. And that's not exactly what happened. And here again, we've talked about the panic, or at least the panicked headlines. Democratic Socialists won in Florida. Oh, my God, the sky is falling. Angie Nixon defeated Alexander Vindman, who was, of course, the centrist moderate Democrat. And now we've been elected another Democratic Socialist. Ooh, everybody be afraid. Be afraid. We've actually got a sound clip from Angie Nixon. She was talking about the Democratic Socialist label. Let's talk about her after we listen to this.
Anti-American, destabilizing, destroying the country. What's your plan to combat that messaging?
Well, first of all, I look forward to Ashley Moody calling me senator in November. And secondly, Ashley Moody actually used 10 million of our dollars that were supposed to go towards the most medically needy kids in our state to divert that funding and to defeat ballot initiatives that the citizens placed on the ballot. And so Ashley Moody doesn't care about anything but herself. We continue to see her net worth increase. Meanwhile, Floridians across our state, their net worth is going down. They have absolutely nothing in their savings account. She won't even hold town hall meetings unless they're Republicans. I am someone who's willing to go out and talk to everyone, even if they don't believe how I believe ideologically, because I want to represent all Floridians here in the state of Florida. Many people who have called and reached out to Ashley Moody's office for help, you know who they call? Because she doesn't return their call. They call me. They email me, and we help connect them to the resources that they need. And so I'm not running away from the people, I'm running to them. And I look forward to becoming their next United States Senator come November.
Well, a Democratic nominee who wants to be called governor in your state is David Jolly, and he praised you as a fighter, but he also said that he flatly rejects socialism. How do you plan to unite the party around your campaign right now?
Again, it is not about labels. It's about the most basic rights that people here in the state need. They need housing. Right now here in our state, it costs over 18% of the national average to rent a home or to rent an apartment here.
Ooh.
People are paying 300 more times for property insurance here in the state of Florida. We witnessed Ashley Moody fail to extend the ACA subsidies, which caused nearly 300,000 people to be knocked off of the Affordable Care Act rolls. She doesn't care about anyone but herself. And also, she did that because her campaign donors are health insurance companies. And so I look forward, Ashley Moody, to taking you on and to whooping you in November, and you will be calling me your senator.
Ooh, tough talk. What do we think, Aaron? Tell me what to think.
Well, I can only give you the facts and let you decide for yourself.
Come on.
So Angie Nixon, obviously you can see there, she is a very charismatic and compelling speaker. And that's why I beat Alex Vindman, who is not. Alex Vindman outspent her about 20-1 in that primary, and he lost because he just didn't have her ability to organize. And also, some things to keep in mind, Angie Nixon, she is Black. She really got significant margins in northern Florida, where most of the Democratic primary voters are Black, and she also in South Florida, where you have a very well organized Black community that really turned out for her. So her nomination is also kind of a testament to Black voters being really energized right now, very mad at Calais and overturning the VRA, and in Florida in particular, they re-gerrymandered the state after that decision. So it speaks to that as well. But she has a very, very uphill climb. Florida is a very expensive state. You have the Miami TV market. You have the Orlando TV market. You have the Tampa Bay St. Petersburg TV market. You have the Jacksonville TV market. And you have a bunch of other smaller ones that you need to be in order to, be on television and get in front of most people. Alex Vindman outspent her 20-1. But one of the reasons why he lost is that spending only like a few $1 million on TV in Florida actually doesn't get you very far. It doesn't get you in front of most people. And it certainly seems like she's not going to get a ton of money here. And so I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say it's impossible for her to win, if only because, the economy seems to be getting worse. If we're in a recession and the bottom falls out, a lot comes into play, but Florida has been trending right. It's an expensive state. Ashley Moody is less controversial than a lot of other Republican candidates, and Democrats looking across the country at potential options, of reach Senate seats to flip. Florida won 14 points for Trump. There may be better options in much cheaper states like Nebraska or Kansas or in Idaho, you have an independent. In South Dakota, you have an independent. In Montana, there's a wonky three-way race. So and then they're looking at, you could advertise in all of those for the same cost. It would cost to advertise in Florida alone. And so it's going to be she's not going to have many resources. And I think unless there's, the national environment gets even worse for Republicans, it's just going to be really hard for her to break through.
This is supposed to be a change election. This is supposed to be an election where even popular Republicans may be voted out of office because people are they want something new and different. So why wouldn't PACs or the Democratic Party support Angie Nixon, give her a chance?
It's because, they see themselves as having better options in other states. That's why, if in Florida, like I said, it's going to cost you in order to get in front of everyone for like the last few weeks of the election, it's going to cost about like $40 million. In a state like Kansas, for example, where you have, Adam Hamilton won the primary there. He's the minister in the largest church in the state. He's shown crossover appeal. There's a poll showing him, I think, down 1 point against Roger Marshall. In Kansas, you have the Kansas City market, and then you have like Wichita and Topeka, and like the rest is, pretty cheap. And so, for $40 million, you could saturate that state for, the last 2 months of the election pretty much. So when you decide between Kansas and Florida, if you think you have about even odds in each, you'd much rather go Kansas just because it's so much cheaper. It's unfortunate for Angie Nixon that she is kind of a poison chalice getting the Democratic nomination in Florida, because the big money people really want to, they don't want to throw their money down the drain. And Florida is just, they've come so close and been burned so many times in Florida. It's just going to be tough to persuade people to spend there instead of cheaper states. Do
you think Alexander Vindman would have gotten a war chest?
Well, I mean, he had something of one. He did have a national name. He was using kind of the high pressure campaign fundraising tactics that all of the listeners really don't like. If you have a phone or an email account, you've gotten texts and emails from him, and I'm sure you're fed up with them, but they do seem to work, even though they are, there have been stories out about how it's a very unethical practice. But he's able to raise, I think, $14 million, which again, it's not much in Florida, but if he was able to keep doing that, he would have been able to, maybe persuade more people to donate. Angie Nixon raised less than $1 million. She's not going to become a superstar fundraiser overnight. And so I think Democrats just looking to kind of, where can we be competitive? Florida becomes an easy state to triage.
Yeah. And you are correct. I do get those texts. I get them on a daily basis, multiple times a day. And I don't even read them anymore. I just hit delete and label as spam, but they just keep coming. Once in a while, I even get them from Trump, which, who's buying my information? That's what I want to know. Because if you're a Republican entity and you bought my phone number, I want to tell you that's a waste of your money. But yeah, I hear you. I know what you mean. Oh, because I am a broadcast professional, we are way overdue for a break. Aaron Kleinman and I will be right back after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Our senior political reporter for Heartland Signal is Aaron Kleinman. He also follows all the primaries and takes us through all the races. You can sign up for his newsletter, Radio Free America. Go to heartlandsignal.com. And I know, Aaron, that you had a chat with Andy. And one of the things Andy told me that you mentioned about this race we were just talking about, Vindman and Nixon, that it might help national Dems not to have Vindman as the nominee. Why?
They'll face a lot more pressure. They would, if he were the nominee again, he's been on MS Now a lot. People know him from the first Trump impeachment. They would have faced a lot of pressure to spend in Florida when, again, for people like you and me, we remember when Florida was, deciding presidential elections. But it is these days, it's about as Republican as, like I said, Nebraska or Kansas, two states that are just much cheaper to advertise in. And so taking pressure off national Democrats to really invest a lot of money in Florida frees up resources that could go to other states where, they probably have a similar chance of winning, but are just a lot cheaper to advertise in. And, the Senate, it's got the rural state bias, which is, very unfortunate and distorts our politics. But, it means that Senate seat in Kansas counts just as much as that Senate seat in Florida. And so, it probably makes a lot of sense to put that money in Kansas instead of Florida if you're looking for reach opportunities.
Well, before we walk away from Florida, let's talk about the primary for the Republican nominee to run for governor in that state.
Yeah. So Byron Donalds, is going to be the nominee, but he had pretty much all of the institutional support, and he like barely got above 50%. One of the other candidates running against him was a guy named James Fishback, who's like a right-wing troll, and he got 10% of the vote statewide. So like, okay, whatever, who cares? But a really interesting thing, a really kind of scary thing, is that he won like all the precincts around Florida State University. So like all the like under 25 Republicans are voting for like this guy who's got deeply regressive views on like just about everything. He was, I think, fired from a job for misconduct with an underage girl or something. I don't want
Ew.
to. Yeah, like I want to be careful about what I say there. It was like something along those lines. I don't want to get into specifics because I forget the exact specifics, but it was very unseemly. Just really kind of gross guy. And so you can kind of see where the Republican Party is headed when, again, the entire Florida State campus is voting for this guy. You want to talk about, Democratic socialists are so popular in Western Queens in New York City. I mean, look at James Fishback and compare him to the most insane Democrat you've known, and it's similar. It's similarly alarming, more alarming than the furthest left person you can find, and he is winning over the youngest Republicans, which is just kind of terrifying. But also, back in that race, there's another candidate in there, Jay Collins. He didn't really do very well, but you can see on the map of where primary results came in, the most rural parts of Florida all voted against Donalds, or he got less great margins there. And Donalds is black, and you wonder, are Florida Republicans going to come out in the midterms to vote for Byron Donalds? It's a decent question, and Trump's not on the ballot. The Senate campaign doesn't look very exciting. So, maybe in the gubernatorial race where Democrats do have a well-funded candidate, Dave Jolly, I know he was on WCPT recently, maybe Democrats kind of have a better shot at the Florida gubernatorial election than we thought.
Okay, that makes perfect sense to me. I understand now. I do have a friend who went to that college, and I am going to be talking to her and getting her take on that, because that is just so bizarre to me. I want to continue on. I want to speak with you about what has been described as the ugliest primary in the country, or as Vox put it, the worst primary in America. Talk about that one, if you would.
Yeah, so I don't know if you're familiar with Randy Fine, a congressman from Florida.
The name sounds vaguely familiar.
He is, like if the Israeli politician Itamar Ben-Gvir were an American, he'd be Randy Fine. Like he is kind of represents almost like the furthest right part of the Israeli politics spectrum. He has mapped that onto the United States in terms of he basically thinks that Palestinians are subhuman. He has talked about nuking them. He when he was first elected in a special election, he underperformed the top Trump by like 20% or something. He's just a deeply unpleasant guy. And he was facing off in the primary against Dan Bilzerian, who it's very unfortunate how many people that I thought were a joke 20 years ago I now have to take seriously.
Isn't that amazing? Same here.
Yeah. So Bilzerian, he's like, like this clavicular kid. He was like the proto, he was the proto clavicular. He was this guy who would just like pop up on Instagram with like ridiculously ripped dude who's like had some type of plastic surgery and like talk about parties he was going to in Las Vegas. Now he is a deeply anti-Semitic podcaster who basically ran against Fine, he praised Hitler during the campaign. And these guys are really showing you kind of what's going on in the Republican primary right now. You have Randy Fine and Dan Bilzerian. And I think, what this really shows is that there's very little, almost zero constituency within the Republican Party, or at least within MAGA, for people who actually want peace in the Middle East. You either have people who think, the that Palestinians shouldn't exist, and you have people who think that Jews shouldn't exist. Though that's what the fight is within the Republican Party. There is, and like we just got through a pretty nasty primary in Michigan between Haley Stevens and Abdul El Sayed. I think both of them said that they want peace in Israel and Palestine. They might disagree about how to get there, but they don't want people to keep killing each other there. Whereas on the Republican side, the two sides represented by Randy Fine and Dan Bilzerian, they do want people to keep killing each other there. That's the difference between the parties right now.
And I know we're not talking about El Sayed since that race is over, but I think that with what he says and the kinds of commercials he's running, I think he's really working hard to convince people who think that Muslims are bad and evil. And what is it, Laura? Doesn't Laura Loomer want them just removed from this country? I think that's one of her new things is anybody who follows the religion of Islam has no business being in the United States. But I think he's doing what needs to be done. He's got his own followers. He doesn't have to worry about them. But the people who might be, I don't know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Look at him and look at his name. I think he is trying to win them over by showing them in many ways, look, I'm just like you. I'm just like you.
Yeah. And he has, a benefit too, where, he's from Southeast Michigan. The Arab, the Middle Eastern, North African community in Southeast Michigan is pretty well established. It's been there for decades. I think if you grew up there, you probably know people who have Arabic sounding names. People who are practicing Muslims, that's just kind of part of your experience there. So he has that going for him, that he's not just this totally alien thing to the people of Southeast Michigan. But yeah, he does still kind of need to show himself as hey, they just spent $60 million against me in this primary. I'm about to show you that, hey, I'm not this scary outsider. I am, he's the guy who grew up in the Detroit suburbs and played lacrosse at the University of Michigan and came back home and worked for the Wayne County, Public Health Administration. And that's what he understands. That's what he has to do. And there were some polls showing him down right after the primary by at least a few points. And I think that's any candidate should assume work like you're down a few points. Mm-hmm. And I think he is doing that. And we've actually gotten a couple of polls since then showing him up. Though, again, you throw them all into the average. And again, these are actual pollsters I've heard of before, pollsters, who have been vetted.
Yeah.
But yeah, GBAO and Susquehanna polling have both shown him up 6 or 7 points after Beacon and Shaw and Epic MRA showed him down 3 to 4 points. And so, yeah, it's a year where Republicans are polling very poorly nationwide. Michigan is a naturally kind of purple state, so you'd expect him to have some, he should have kind of some structural advantages, but he did just get out of this very nasty primary. Maybe there is some latent Islamophobia that could cost him votes. And so, yeah, he has to work to make sure that he gets the votes that he needs.
Aaron Kleinman and I have all but blown through a commercial break, but Devin is going to rescue us by taking it right now. We'll be back after this.
Don't turn that dial. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now.
A fair balance where the facts come out.
On WCPT 820.
Our senior political reporter and overall data man, Aaron Kleinman, is here. He puts out a newsletter once a week. Go to heartlandsignal.com and sign up for Radio Free America. We are here talking primaries. One of the people that I see, no matter, it seems like what channel I turn my television to, is Debbie Wasserman Schultz. This woman, Aaron, is everywhere. And her name is vaguely familiar, but I really haven't followed her career. Tell me about Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Yeah, she's Democrats' bad penny. They can't get rid of her. So she kind of rose to fame initially in 2016 when she was put in charge of the DNC under Obama. Obama had this idea, he's like, the DNC, it's this backwater. I'm just going to put, the political hack in charge of it and ignore it. And that was a huge mistake because, in that time, there was, a belief within most Democratic circles that Hillary Clinton would be the nominee. Everyone's just going to kind of circle the wagons around her. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, as head of the DNC at the time, was part of that. The DNC was also in charge of, ensuring that there was supposed to be a fair primary in the 2016, even though they all thought it'd be a coronation for Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders comes through and, all of a sudden it's like, hey, maybe Hillary Clinton wasn't as unanimously popular among Democrats as we thought. And there were some very ham-handed attempts to kind of try to, close ranks behind her, even in light of that. And thanks to, the Podesta email hack and WikiLeaks, people got the emails involving her and showing her, really kind of biased against Bernie and, not very competently trying to steer the DNC heading into a disastrous election for the country. You would think that this might end her political career, but it hasn't. She's now, she's kept winning re-election in Florida. And again, the latest round of gerrymandering eliminated her old seat. And she decided that she would run in a seat that for the last 30 plus years has been held by a Black Democrat. She won the primary for that seat. And, now there will be one less Black Democrat from the South, thanks to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, seeking to continue her own political career, even though she really has not done much for the Democratic Party and has, in fact, been pretty bad on net for it. So Florida Democrats have, another reason why national Democrats don't want to go into Florida is that the state party does not have the best reputation for, putting forward and electing the most effective lawmakers.
Okay. If this is a traditionally Black area, why did the African-American candidate, Luther Campbell, not do better?
Well, Luther Campbell was one of, he's the most famous one there. If anyone here has listened to Two Live Crew before, but there were I think 4 serious Black candidates for that seat, and they split the vote, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz won with the plurality.
And, the DNC, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know this is a little bit off topic, isn't their whole reason for living fundraising? I mean, basically, yeah, they do a couple of other things. They're supposed to help with candidates at some point. But aren't they just fundraising?
Yeah, well, it's not only fundraising, but it's ensuring that money goes where it's supposed to is a big part of the job. And so, I mean, yeah, you can see that Wasserman Schultz, even though she kind of got the boot from the DNC a decade ago, she still has those fundraising connections, and that certainly helped her. But yeah, the main things it does is it raises money, especially for the presidential campaign. And then again, it's supposed to organize a fair presidential primary, which she very much did not do.
Interesting. So do you think that because she won in the primary, that means Democrats will lose? Because will the African-American population, when assuming they do come out in the midterms, that they will be angry about what happened?
No, I mean, I think that seat, it's kind of it's a humiliating thing that, she is representing that seat. But you have to remember that, again, Angie Nixon did amazingly well among Black voters in the Democratic primary. And, she has really, I mean, the reason why she won that is she's just been barnstorming the state, trying to make connections wherever she can through organizing. And so, it'll be tough for her to kind of get the word out, as wide as she could. But, she still, can help turn out those voters. And again, those voters seem like they're turning out regardless of who's on the ballot. They're just mad because, the Voting Rights Act was gutted. We saw this in Tennessee. In the primaries there. We saw this in South Carolina in the primaries there. Black voters are turning out higher than we anticipated. That likely is because the VRA got gutted.
Is it true that you referred to Florida as the state which is the graveyard of empires?
It's, having worked that word.
I love that.
The local, I mean, they elect so many crummy Democrats is a big problem. There were 3 former state lawmakers, Kim Daniels, James Bush, and Daphne Campbell. We can't get into all three of them on this show, but if you guys want to subscribe to the newsletter, I'll provide you links for it. And if you can just look them up, they have a habit of, really just kind of humiliating the party and also voting with Republicans on a lot of issues. And it can be very tough to win in a state like that. And my experience there is that there's a real problem where pretty much all of the political spending is done through like a shadowy cabal of PACs that you basically have no idea who's running them. The campaign finance laws there are just very, very loose in that regard. And so I think that just makes it hard to have like any accountability like within the party for like, who is funding what, who's aligned with whom. There's just so opaque, we don't know. It's all a big shell game there. And so it just becomes very difficult to like get good candidates through in Florida. And it's such a hard state to work in for that reason. And also the Democratic Party there, because it's all, all the spending is done through these kind of like shadow organizations. The party in particular is just very weak. There's no one to really kind of like mediate this and like try to make it so that candidates align with the values that we expect. I'm not expecting, you have to agree with X, Y, and Z, but like don't vote with Republicans on everything at the very least. There's just no disciplining function there. So it's a very frustrating state to work in. So I think a lot of Democrats, when they saw Angie Nixon beating Alex Vindman, they're like, well, I'm relieved because I'm not going to get that pressure to spend there.
We are going to take a break, and I am going to start working on my own evil cabal. Aaron Kleinman and I will be right back. And Aaron, I have to think about whether or not you're going to be invited to be in the evil cabal. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We'll talk about it later. We'll be right back after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
I wouldn't trust anybody else.
On WCPT 820.
You should sign up for Radio Free America. Go to heartlandsignal.com. It is a newsletter that Aaron Kleinman puts out once a week. He is our senior Heartland Signal political reporter. We are talking about the primaries. Thank God we are finished with Florida. I'm done with Florida in so many ways. Yeah. So where should we go? I like Alaska. I know we need to talk about Wyoming too, but I think what is going on in Alaska is very interesting. What do you think, Mr. Kleinman?
So Alaska, you're right. Alaska's fascinating because for a long time, it's voted Republican at the presidential level. It had the last time it voted for a Democratic presidential nominee was 1964. But it has shown a willingness to elect Democrats statewide before, including Mary Petlola, who is ahead. So they have kind of a all-party primary in August, and then the top four candidates there advance to the general, and there's a runoff conducted there. So kind of, so ultimately it comes down to the two highest vote getters. And Petlola, she's looked very strong in early returns from the August primary in Alaska. Like she's going to finish in first with the most votes, and they're still counting votes. And in Alaska, it's a very big state, as you may know. And the votes that, from the furthest flung areas take a longer time to get in. And in Alaska, the rural areas are some of the most Republican because it tends to have a high native population. And so it looks like Alaska, she might get more than 50% in this primary, which is a great sign heading into November that she can get a majority of the vote in Alaska. And that would be a really critical state to flipping in order to get to his majority in the Senate.
I've seen one of Mary's ads, and it feels to me that at least a little bit she's kind of channeling Lisa Murkowski, sort of like, we're Alaska and we're different. And maybe, they don't understand us, but we know what we need and we know what we want. We're Alaska, which I think for Alaska is a really good stand to take.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've ever been. It is very different. Everything there is just
yes,
bigger
I have been
and more
to Alaska.
Remote.
It is delightful when the bugs aren't around.
Yeah, the state bird's the mosquito there.
Yeah, really. That's about how big they are.
So, again, it's a lot different from the continental U.S., and it can be very idiosyncratic. The state legislature for the past almost decade now has been run by a coalition of, independents that, and then they can kind of align themselves with the Republicans or the Democrats, and maybe even some breakaway Republicans or Democrats. It's a very kind of, it's very, it shifts a lot there in a way that party designations are a lot more rigid in the lower 48 than they are in Alaska. And so you also might have Democrats win the governorship there for the first time in a long time, in I think decades, because the two main Democratic candidates for governor, Jonathan Christ Tompkins and Tom Begich, they're the top two vote getters in that primary, and they'll probably get close to around 50% of the net vote when all the votes are counted. So Alaska as a state, maybe it is moving to the left. It's not a particularly religious state. It has a relatively high non-white population. So, maybe Alaska, is getting even more purple now. So it'll be a good state to watch, though. It's going to take a while to count all the votes there. So on election night, don't watch Alaska unless you really want to stay up for about a week.
Maybe people seem to be telling me that I'm reading too much into this, but I thought it was really interesting that when Kamala Harris did a big ad for her new PAC, one of the people she mentioned was Mary Peltola and said, this woman's great and we should get behind her. And so send me money for this new PAC. And Mary came out publicly and said, would really rather you didn't talk about me. You seem like a very nice person, but, don't talk about me. I'm fine. I'm fine all on my own, which I thought was very interesting. And if I were Kamala Harris and God help us is supposedly thinking about running again in 2028, I think I would say that to myself, maybe I'm not as popular as I need to be or that I thought I was. I mean, here's this person who doesn't want me to talk about them. Everybody seems to be telling me I'm reading way too much into this. So go ahead, pile on.
No, I don't. I mean, I think that is a really big red flag for Kamala Harris that, this candidate saying, I don't want you to talk, to speak about, there are other candidates, fresh faces that maybe Lola would want to have raising money for her. Maybe someone like John Ossoff, maybe someone like Andy Bashir, maybe someone like Mark Kelly. Might be something that she'd be like, oh, this is someone that I could see myself aligning with. And, I think pretty much as soon as polls close in November, we're going to be starting to talk about the 2028 Democratic presidential primary. And I think
within minutes, we will
within
be doing
minutes. That. And I think it is worth kind of looking back at, who candidates in purple states and red states want to align themselves with, because that is the sign of a candidate that might have the crossover appeal that we need in 2028. Mm-hmm. So, I think that is meaningful that she told Kamala Harris to back off. But yeah, and in general, anyone who's worked out of DC, anyone who's worked at national work knows that you got to let the local candidates run their own race. And Mary Peltola knows Alaska better than any of us, and you got to let her run the race that will win her votes in Alaska. And if that includes telling off Kamala Harris, you got to let her do that.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to Wyoming. Honestly, a state that, at least politically, I don't pay a huge amount of attention to. So tell me what's going on there.
Well, Wyoming is, actually a real bright spot for the country. Now, you might be thinking this is the most Republican state in the country. What are you talking about? Well, in Wyoming, if you want to make a difference at all in state politics, you basically have to be a Republican. And so there are a lot of people in the Republican Party in Wyoming who, might feel, not necessarily at home with the National Party, but, they're like, hey, it's Wyoming. If I want to make a difference, I got to be a Republican. And for a long time, non-ideologues, people who just wanted the state government to function, maybe, conservative folks who might not see eye to eye with you and me on everything, but they want a functional state government, ran the state. that started to change when actually a few years ago, the hard right Freedom Caucus won a majority of votes, like a majority of seats in the state house. And, just like very austere budgets, culture war, destroying the state, basically, that type of stuff. And there was a real worry heading into last night that, they would strengthen themselves even more. And they didn't. I think it is now 14 state lawmakers in Wyoming that remember that hard right caucus lost their primaries. They nominated a moderate, the guy that Trump didn't endorse for governor. And moderate, being a relative term here, but so it seems like voters in Wyoming really have rejected the hard right republicanism, and I think that's good overall. I don't want to see people suffer. I don't want to see state governments collapse. In Wyoming, it is a not particularly wealthy state, and you need government intervention to help people there just like cope with the elements. And so it's good to see that, Republicans kind of moving away from the abyss a bit. And if Republicans move away from the abyss nationwide, that's overall good for America. And so I'm happy that they did this in Wyoming.
Excellent. We still have a little bit of time, so let's touch on the race in California to replace Eric Swalwell, somebody who seemed like such a rising star until he wasn't.
Yeah. Well, that it's one of those things where people say things, but it's not fit for publication, and so you can't really do anything about it. And that had been going on with Swalwell for a long time. And it's like, well, there are rumors going around about this guy, but they're rumors, so you can't say anything. And so you just kind of let them slide because he's not really particularly that important. Then he starts running for governor of California. People start going on the record, and boom, it's done. So yeah, there's a race to replace him. And it's another race where AIPAC weighed in. And again, they seem like they might be on the losing end again. Again, it's California. They'll take their time counting votes, but Aisha Wahab, it looks like she might be the next congresswoman from the East Bay. And so that's one to keep my eyes on. And then there was actually another special election last night, Joan. I don't know if you saw that, the one in Pennsylvania.
No. Tell me about it.
So in the state house in Pennsylvania, Democrats have had a 1-seat majority there for 4 years. 1 seat, and so that's been very hard sometimes, but they've been able to kind of pass a lot of bills, and even though they really don't have much margin for error. Well, that's 3 seats now because Democrats flipped a suburban Pittsburgh seat that Trump won by 18 points in a special election.
And, I'm seeing the writing seems to be on the wall because I'm seeing that over and over again. Well, a Democrat won, but Trump took this area last time around by 9 points or 10 points or 15 points, or as you just said, 18 points. It does seem like the tide is turning.
Yeah.
I don't want to get out over my skis because, as you know, we have been crushed before.
Yeah. And in Pennsylvania, actually, this happened in 2018. We flipped a longtime Republican held seat and then lost it in November. But back then, the margin didn't shift all that much. It shifted a few percentage points towards Republicans, and that ended up being enough. So, I think Democrats overall would be fine if there's a nationwide shift of 15 points instead of 19 points, And also this seat has a lot of symbolic importance because, it is, an area that used to be one of the most conservative in the state. It's Butler County, not far from, Butler, PA. And it used to be represented by this guy named Darrell Metcalf, who was like one of the most obnoxious Republicans in the state legislature. And like he was there before Trump. He was like kind of like a proto-Trump. Trump was kind of, when Trump appears on the scene, he's talking like this guy has talked for a decade. And now a Democrat represents that seat. It's a district that, again, it's the Pittsburgh kind of, it's just to the north of the county line, Allegheny County. It's just to the north of that. And so it's an area that used to be so Republican, but you have more and more families moving there. You have more millennials moving there into the suburbs, and just the far right stuff just won't play there anymore. And by the way, the Republican there ran, he ran calling his opponent a socialist. That like the yard signs in the district was Dukes is a socialist, vote for Timko. And it didn't work. So another thing to keep in mind as we head into November.
I know that there are still 4 states that have their primaries in September. Since states can change the date of their primary if they so choose, is there some advantage to being this late in the game?
No, it's bad for you. For the political party, it is very bad to have your primary this late. I think it was in 1996 in Massachusetts, there was a primary that was decided by double-digit votes total. It went to court. Democrats didn't know their nominee until a month before the election, and so it is a big disadvantage for a political party to have your primary in September. And
so why don't they change it?
New Hampshire is actually one of those states, and they actually are changing it. I think in 2028, their state primary is going to be in June. And yeah, the rest of these states, like Massachusetts, Delaware, I think it's inertia. And then they're also just, one-party states, like in Massachusetts, the Republican Party is almost irrelevant. And so, the Democrats, the real election is September anyway, so they don't see any need to move it. But yeah, it's not good for the parties to have them this late. And I think there used to be more late primaries, and parties have slowly seen that that's a bad idea.
Wisconsin used to be in September, and they decided to move it up all the way to mid-August. Whew. Man, those Wisconsinites, they are so radical.
Yeah. And Francesca Hong, probably grateful that they moved it to August, because if she'd had to stay in the race through September, who knows what else would have come out there.
Yeah.
But yeah. So this was the last big primary night of the year, and it was also the last major special election of the year. So right now it's just we got about, 12 weeks, 11 weeks until the midterms. And so,
I used to have the account. I was going day by day, but I've lost the will to live, so I no longer have that tally. But yeah, it's roughly 2 months and change.
Yeah, it sneaks up on you. So, Labor Day is the historic start of the general election sprint. This year, Republicans are having a midterm convention, September 9th and 10th, where they're going to try to make their case. And, everyone here at WCPT and Heartland, I think we'll be taking a pretty skeptical eye toward that. I think we'll be covering, we'll be giving you a little dose of reality in, instead of letting them dominate the airwaves that week. But yeah, we're entering the home stretch here, folks.
Aaron, thank you so much. It is always a pleasure to talk about these races with you. Really appreciate you spending the time with us.
Thanks so much for having me on, Joan. Take care.
You too. And I will reconsider you for the evil cabal, okay?
Yes.